They say the wind don't knock. But that morning Elijah heard it clear as day. 3 slow raps on the cabin door just after dawn, when the mountains were still wrapped in blue snow fog and the fire inside hadn't yet burned warm. He hadn't had a visitor in 5 winters, and he hadn't expected anyone ever again. He rose, hand grazing the old rifle by the door out of habit more than fear. But when he opened it, what stood there wasn't danger. It was a woman, a young one. Barefoot, covered in frost, her dress clinging to her like it had soaked up the whole storm. Her arms cradled something beneath her coat. At first he thought it was just bundles of cloth. Then he saw her swollen belly. She tried to speak, but her lips were blue, and before a word came out, she fell forward, straight into his arms. Elijah caught her. And for a moment he just stood there on the frozen porch, the cold biting through his shirt, holding the weight of someone else's story. He didn't ask questions. Not then. Just carried her in and laid her by the fire. He stoked the flames higher and wrapped her in every wool blanket he owned. She was burning up and ice cold at the same time. Fever, he figured, and exhaustion. Whatever road she'd walked hadn't been meant for someone carrying a child. As the hours passed, she drifted in and out. No name, no explanation. Just a soft moaning in her sleep, and once a whisper he barely caught. Don't let him find me. He wanted to ask who, but the look on her face said not to. By sundown, her fever broke a little. She still hadn't eaten more than a few sips of broth. Elijah set a cup by her side and gave her space. Outside, the snow had started again, soft and soundless. Inside, the fire cracked like a voice too hoarse to speak. That night, while she slept, he noticed her satchel near the door. It was small, worn leather. Looked like it had been stitched up more than once. He hadn't touched it. He didn't believe in poking around in what wasn't his. But something was sticking out. A piece of paper torn on one side, like it had been ripped from a journal. Elijah bent down, just to tuck it in. But then he saw what was written, just 5 words, and they turned something over in him. If I don't make it. He stood there for a long time, staring at those words like they were meant for him. Like the wind had knocked on his door that morning with more than a body. Like it had brought him a decision he hadn't asked for, but couldn't turn away from. She needed help. And maybe, just maybe, he needed to help her. Not for redemption, not for thanks. Just because sometimes the frontier wasn't just about surviving. Sometimes it was about choosing who you became in the silence. The next morning came slow, the kind of gray light that slips through the cracks of old wood and makes everything feel like it's holding its breath. Elijah had barely slept. The woman stirred just past dawn, her lips dry, her face pale but clearer than before. He knelt beside her, holding a tin cup of warm water. You're safe, he said gently, like talking to a skittish horse. No, one's coming through that snow. She blinked a few times, confused at first. Then her hand went to her belly, and only after that, her eyes locked on his. Where am I? My cabin. In the hills west of Iron Creek, he said. You made it far, but barely. She looked around the room, breathing hard like she might run again, but her body wouldn't let her. Elijah handed her the cup, and for a moment they sat in silence while she drank. Then softly, she said, My name's Grace. Elijah nodded. Elijah. She didn't offer anything else, and he didn't press. She needed rest more than answers. Still, her voice echoed in his mind. Don't let him find me. That wasn't something you just forgot. The storm outside kept on for 2 more days. Elijah tended the fire, cooked broth, kept the horses calm. Grace mostly slept, her arms always wrapped around her belly like she was guarding something precious. On the 3rd morning, she managed to stand. Barefoot still, one hand on the wall for balance, she whispered, I need to go. Elijah didn't move. Go where? I can't stay. He'll be looking. Elijah crossed the room slowly. You barely made it through the last storm. You step outside now, you won't make it a mile. Grace's jaw tightened. There was fear in her, but also something stronger, something stubborn. I can't let him find the baby. The room fell quiet. Elijah stared into her face for the first time, not just the fever or the dirt, but the lines behind her eyes. She couldn't have been more than 25, but there was a lifetime in her stare. She was terrified. but not for herself. Elijah reached toward the satchel near the hearth. There was a paper sticking out. I didn't mean to read it, but I saw the words. Grace looked down. Her hands trembled. I'm not asking what happened, he said. But if someone's after you, you won't be safer anywhere else. There ain't a soul for 20 miles and the trail's buried. She hesitated. Then, voice low, she said, He's a preacher. Elijah blinked. What? Preacher Nathan Calloway. That's what he tells people. Back in Harmony Ridge. But what he does behind doors? Her voice broke. I thought I could run. Start over. But now. She stopped. Clutched her belly, again. Now I can't afford to be wrong. Elijah felt something shift inside him. A memory, maybe. Something old and buried. He walked to the window. The wind had calmed, but the world outside was still white and unforgiving. You won't be wrong here, he said. She turned toward him, eyes welling, lips parting like she wanted to say more, but instead she sat back down slowly and let the tears fall. Elijah didn't know if it was hope or grief pouring out of her. Maybe both. All he knew was something had crossed his threshold that day. Not just a woman, not just a baby, but a reason. A reason to be more than just a man hiding in the hills. And in that quiet cabin under a sky still heavy with winter, he made an unspoken promise. He would protect her. No matter who she was running from. No matter what it cost. Elijah had lived alone so long, he'd forgotten what it was like to hear someone breathe in the same room. Now there were two hearts beating under his roof, one barely grown, the other worn from running. And the air felt different. Not louder, just fuller. Like the walls had started to listen again. Grace was getting stronger. She moved around the cabin slow but steady, helping with small things, washing the tin plates, folding the blankets she once clung to. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her voice had softened, like a door cautiously cracked open. Do you ever go into town? She asked one morning, eyes lingering on the snow beyond the window. Used to, Elijah said, pouring hot water over coffee grounds. A long time ago. Haven't been back since my wife passed. Grace looked down, guilt flickering across her face. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's all right, he said quickly, then paused. She's the reason I came up here. Grief'll do that to a man, make him run from everything but himself. They sat in silence a while. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, just understanding. Later that day, Grace stood by the fire, rubbing her belly, then looked up. I never wanted to bring this to someone else's doorstep. I thought I could outrun it. Thought maybe if I got far enough, I'd be someone else. You ain't gotta be someone else, Elijah said gently. Just safe. Grace smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed troubled. That night, she left her satchel out in the open. On purpose, maybe. Elijah didn't touch it, but when she caught him looking, she said quietly, There's a letter inside. I wrote it in case I didn't make it. It's for the baby. She didn't cry when she said it. She didn't need to. Elijah nodded once, then went back to stirring the stew. But inside, something pulled at him, sharp and familiar. The thought of loss. The ache of what might have been. The next morning, he found her out back near the stable, standing still, eyes on the trees. Something wrong? He asked. I heard something, she said. Hoofbeats. Distant, but steady. Elijah's face changed. He moved past her toward the edge of the clearing. Nothing but pines and snow. But he'd lived on this land long enough to know. Sound travels different in winter. Grace's hand went to her belly again. It could be nothing. Elijah said nothing, but his jaw tightened. That night he bolted the doors. He checked the windows twice, and for the first time in 5 winters he loaded his old rifle and set it near the hearth. Not because he wanted trouble, but because trouble had a habit of finding what was worth protecting. Grace sat near the fire, her fingers brushing gently over her stomach. I don't even know if it's a boy or girl, she said, half to herself. But I talked to them anyway. Elijah sat beside her, not too close. What do you say? She smiled softly. That I'm sorry, and that I'll do better. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Elijah said, Maybe we all carry a letter like that. We just never write it down. Grace looked over, and something passed between them. a shared understanding. Two people who'd lost too much but still chose to try. Outside, the wind howled low like a warning. Inside, the fire burned steady. What would you write in a letter if you thought it was your last? Let us know down in the comments. By the time morning came, the clouds had cleared, but something else had settled. A silence that didn't feel right. Elijah stepped out with his coat tight around his shoulders, snow crunching beneath his boots. The sky stretched wide and blue above the pines, and for a moment it almost felt like peace, until he saw the tracks. Not animal, not Grace's. Too wide, too deep. A man's boots, coming from the north ridge, stopping just short of the tree line, then turning back. Elijah crouched and studied them. One set in, one set out. Whoever it was had come close. Real close. Watching, maybe. Waiting. He returned to the cabin quiet, like not to disturb the calm they'd built inside. Grace was setting water to boil, humming low like she used to before the weight of things caught up to her. You ever tell anyone where you were headed? Elijah asked gently, not wanting to alarm her. She looked up, instantly alert. No, I made sure. He nodded. Somebody was here last night, just watching, didn't try the door, didn't knock, but they know we're here now. Grace's face paled, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her belly. Elijah stepped close, steady. You're still safe. I just need to know what we're up against. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she sat down at the edge of the bed and told him. Nathan Calloway had come into Harmony Ridge 3 years ago with a Bible in one hand and a silver tongue in the other. Folks liked him, trusted him. He preached about obedience, about sin and grace, but behind closed doors he ruled with fear, especially over her. She was barely 20 when he took her in under the guise of charity, then used scripture like chains. I tried to leave once before, she said, her voice shaking. He found me at the station, smiled like it was all a misunderstanding, said I had the devil in me, but I knew it wasn't God speaking through him. Elijah's hands clenched at his sides. He'd heard stories like that before. Power twisted into control. Men hiding behind holy words to excuse the worst kind of cruelty. Grace went on. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew he'd never let me go. He'd raise the child like his own. Claim it, twist it into his image. She looked at Elijah, tears gathering. I couldn't let that happen. Elijah crouched beside her, his voice low and certain. Then it won't. Not while I'm breathing. That night, he sat on the porch, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the trees. The cold bit into him, but he didn't move. He knew the kind of man they were dealing with now. And he knew men like Nathan didn't give up just because a trail turned cold. Inside, Grace slept restlessly. Her hand never left her belly, and far beyond the trees, where the stars touched the tips of black pines, someone else watched too. 2 days passed with no new tracks. No sounds from the ridge, just snow melting in soft patches and the faint smell of pine warming under the late winter sun. Elijah kept the rifle nearby, but a strange quiet had settled again. Not peace exactly, just the pause before something changes. Grace spent most of her time near the hearth, sewing small stitches into a baby blanket she'd started from scraps in Elijah's old trunk. Her hands were steadier now, her face softer. There was a kind of stillness to her, like a wild animal starting to trust the ground beneath its feet. Then just past noon, Elijah saw movement down the trail. Not a shadow. Not a deer. A man on horseback, moving slow like he wanted to be seen, but not too soon. Elijah stepped off the porch, rifle resting easy in his hands but loaded all the same. The rider stopped a dozen yards off and tipped his hat. Don't mean to intrude, he called out. His voice was even, but Elijah didn't like how rehearsed it sounded. Name's Amos Talbert. I'm looking for a missing woman. About 5'5", dark hair, expectant. Disappeared from Harmony Ridge near 3 weeks back. Heard tell she might have come this way. Elijah didn't answer right off, just stared, measured, then said, Ain't seen anyone. The man nodded slowly, scanning the property behind Elijah without turning his head. Mind if I water my horse? Long ride from the ridge. Plenty of streams west, Elijah replied. Ain't much for visitors. A long pause hung between them. Finally, the man smiled thinly. Well, suppose I'll ride on then. But if you do see someone fitting that description, there's good folks waiting for her. Preachers know. Beside himself with worry, Elijah didn't flinch. "I'm sure he is." The man tipped his hat again, turned his horse, and rode slow back down the trail, never once looking over his shoulder. Elijah didn't move until he was gone from sight. Then he turned and went inside. Grace was standing at the window, her face pale again. "That was one of Nathan's men," she whispered. "He used to guard the church late, always had a knife on him." Elijah nodded grimly. "He knows you're close. He'll come back." "Yes," Elijah said, "but next time, he won't ask first." That night the cabin felt smaller. The fire crackled but didn't warm as deep. Grace sat in the corner clutching the half-sewn blanket like it might stop time. Elijah cleaned his rifle, hands moving slow and practiced, same way he used to when the world still held purpose. He didn't want violence, not again, not here, but when you open your door to someone lost, you don't just take in their footsteps. You take in their past. And sometimes, their war. The morning came brittle and gray. No sun, no wind, just a kind of stillness that made Elijah's bones ache. He knew that kind of quiet. It was the kind that came before a storm, not the kind that raged in the sky, but the kind that cracked open everything you tried to keep buried. He was splitting wood out back when he heard the cabin door creak open. "You okay?" Grace called softly, wrapping her shawl around her growing belly. "I'm fine," Elijah answered. He didn't turn around. "Just making sure we're stocked. If weather turns bad, we might be stuck in a while." Grace stepped out onto the porch, eyes scanning the pines like she was trying to read what was hiding between them. "I had a dream last night," she said quiet. "I was back in Harmony Ridge. Only it was on fire. And Nathan stood in the middle smiling like he lit the match." Elijah set the axe down slowly and looked over. "Dreams don't mean nothing unless you give 'em power." Grace gave a weak smile. "Yeah, but some nights I do." He walked back toward the porch, wiping his hands on his coat. "That man doesn't own your future, no matter what he told you. You're here now. That's what counts. I just don't want to bring trouble to your door," she whispered. He paused, then looked her in the eye. "Grace, trouble already knocked. Only question now is what we do when it comes back." She nodded, eyes glassy but strong. "Then we face it. Together." That night, the snow started again. Heavy, relentless, the kind that swallowed sound and turned breath into clouds. Elijah kept the fire burning high, checked every window, every latch. But it wasn't the snow that made him uneasy. It was the silence behind it. Around midnight, Grace stirred from sleep, eyes wide. "I heard something." Elijah was already on his feet. Rifle in hand, he moved to the front window and pulled the curtain back just a sliver, a lantern, flickering low. Moving slowly up the trail, then another, 2 lights, then 3. He counted 4 men, and he knew they weren't coming to talk. Elijah turned to Grace. "Go to the cellar, take the blanket, stay low, don't come out unless it's me calling." She didn't argue, just nodded and grabbed the satchel she never let out of reach. "I'm not leaving," she whispered. "But," he cut her off gently. "You're not, you're hiding, and there's a difference." She stepped close, her hand resting briefly on his arm. "I trust you." He watched her disappear into the trapdoor beside the hearth, then moved to the door and unlatched it slowly. The rifle sat steady in his hands, not out of anger, but duty. These men weren't strangers. They were sent by one, and Elijah knew what it was to protect something that couldn't protect itself. Outside, the snow swallowed footsteps, but their voices carried, low, sharp, nervous. Then, a knock. Soft. Measured. Like they expected to be let in. Elijah didn't answer. The knock came again. Then the handle jiggled and finally, one of them spoke. "We don't want trouble, mister, just want the girl. She don't belong to you." Elijah's voice came steady through the door. "She don't belong to you either." A pause. Then laughter, cruel and close. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. She's not worth dying over." Elijah's voice dropped low. "She's worth living for. That's more than you can say." Silence. Then the sound of a boot meeting the door. Elijah backed away, heart steady, eyes locked. He wasn't a young man anymore, but he'd buried a wife, built a life from ash, and now, for the first time in years, something had come into that. Life worth guarding again. He wasn't going to lose it. Not tonight. Not all storms roar when they arrive. Some whisper through the trees before they take everything you've rebuilt. What would you stand your ground for? Tell us in the comments. The first crack splintered across the door like lightning through dry pine. Elijah flinched, but held steady, rifle tight in his grip. They weren't wasting time anymore. Another boot struck, then another. Hinges groaned. The door wouldn't hold much longer. He backed toward the kitchen hearth where the trapdoor sat closed but not locked. Grace was down there holding her breath, likely praying this old cabin had one more miracle in it. Outside, the men started shouting. "You got no claim on her, old man. She's coming home." Elijah's voice rang out, calm but hard. "Home's where a woman don't flinch at footsteps." That brought silence. Then came the final blow. The door cracked open with a violent snap, half hanging on splinters. Snow and cold rushed in as two figures pushed through, guns drawn, teeth clenched. Behind them, two more waited in the trees, their shadows long in the firelight. Elijah didn't fire. Not yet. He let the men see him. Let them see the rifle. Let them hear the old floorboards creak beneath his boots. Then he did something they didn't expect. He talked. "You think you're here doing the Lord's work," he said, voice low and steady. "But I don't recall a single line in that book about dragging a pregnant woman through the snow in the dead of night." The younger one, broad-shouldered and twitchy, barked back. "You don't know what she did. She ran off in sin, left the flock." Elijah shook his head. "She left a cage, and that ain't the same thing." The leader stepped forward then. Amos Talbert. The same man who'd come days before with too much charm and not enough truth. "She's not yours to protect," Amos said coldly. "This don't concern you." But Elijah raised his rifle, not at his chest but the floor between them. "It does now." Amos held his stare, and for a long, frozen second no one moved. Then, a noise from below. Soft. A cough. Grace. It broke the tension like glass. The younger man lunged toward the hearth. Elijah fired once. The shot shattered the air. Missed the man by inches but dropped him to the floor with fear in his eyes. Amos raised his pistol, but he was too slow. Elijah had the aim of a man who'd defended a homestead before. Another warning shot tore through the doorframe beside Amos's head. "Enough," Elijah shouted. "I got 6 more rounds," he added, "and not one of them meant to scare next time." For the first time Amos hesitated. Then, footsteps, behind the men, hoofbeats, fast. A voice rang out from the trees. "Sheriff's here, drop 'em." 3 more riders emerged from the woods, one in a duster, badge glinting. The sheriff of Dawson Creek and 2 deputies, rifles drawn. "Boys, unless you want to winter in a cell, I suggest you step outside," the sheriff called. Turns out Elijah had ridden to town 2 days before, under cover of dark. After seeing those first tracks, left a note with a trusted shopkeep, told him to wire the law if anything felt off. Now the cavalry had arrived. Not with heroics, just with timing. The men surrendered. Elijah's hands didn't shake until it was over. He lowered the rifle. The warmth of the fire returned like breath, into frozen lungs. He opened the trapdoor. Grace looked up, her eyes wet, her arms wrapped around her belly. She hadn't screamed. Hadn't panicked. She just waited. For a kind of ending that, for once, didn't come in pain. "It's over," Elijah whispered. But she shook her head. "No," she said softly. "It's just beginning." The sun rose slow the next morning, as if even the sky was exhausted from the night before. Smoke still clung to the woodpile where a stray bullet had struck, but the cabin stood solid, and so did Elijah. He sat on the porch with a cup of weak coffee, hands still dusted with ash and bark. He wasn't a man who sought trouble, but he knew how to live through it, and more importantly, how to live after it. Inside, Grace slept on the cot by the fire, peacefully for the first time in weeks. Her breathing was steady, her face had softened. Even in sleep she looked lighter, like something had finally let go. The sheriff had stayed late, taken statements, apologized more than once for not arriving sooner. But Elijah didn't blame him. That Ridge Church sat outside Dawson's jurisdiction, and those men had always known how to twist scripture into smoke. "They'll face charges, now," the sheriff said. "Unlawful entry, attempted harm. Might even stick this time." Elijah had only nodded. He wasn't interested in punishment. He was interested in peace. Later that day, Grace woke to the smell of stew. Elijah had gone quiet in the kitchen, moving with a gentleness that didn't quite match his size. She sat up slowly, hand resting on her belly. He turned when he heard her stirring. "Hungry?" She nodded, smiling faintly. "I can't remember the last time I felt safe enough to be." They ate together in silence at first. The kind of silence that didn't ask anything from you. Then Grace spoke. "Do you want to know what was in the bag?" Elijah looked at her. "Only if you want to tell me." She reached beside the hearth and brought the satchel to her lap. It was worn now, scuffed from travel and time. She opened it gently and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. Elijah took it, eyes scanning the careful handwriting. It wasn't money, it wasn't a map, it was a birth certificate, but not for her baby. For her. "I was born in Missouri," she said softly. "Adopted by the preacher's family when I was 6. They said they saved me, that I owed them. But I found this 2 months ago in the old records." Her voice caught. "I realized I had a name before they gave me one, a mother who held me before they said I belonged to them." She wiped her eyes. "I guess I ran because I wanted to belong to myself for once." Elijah folded the paper carefully. "You do now." That night, he gave her the bed and stoked the fire high. Snow began to fall again outside, but this time it was quiet, gentle, soft against the glass like a whisper instead of a warning. Before he turned in, Elijah stood at the door and looked out across the land. The forest had stopped hiding things. The ridge was just a shape in the distance now. Grace was safe. The child she carried was real, and so was this new beginning. Unexpected, unasked for, but no less sacred. The winter didn't end in a day, but it softened. Slowly, quietly, the way sorrow sometimes fades without anyone noticing. By early March, the snowbanks around the cabin had thinned, revealing patches of frozen soil, tiny green blades daring to push through. Grace was nearly full term now. She moved slower, steadier, one hand always resting on the round of her belly, like it was a compass pointing her toward something better. Elijah had built a cradle out of pine, nothing fancy, just strong and smooth and made with the kind of patience that came from healing, not hurry. He didn't ask whose child it was. He'd stopped needing to know. One evening as the firelight flickered and coyotes called low from the woods, Grace spoke into the quiet. "I used to think I had to earn every bit of kindness," she said. "Like it was something I had to buy, with obedience or silence." Elijah looked up from his whittling. "And now?" She smiled, though it trembled. "Now I think maybe some people just give it, because they've known what it's like to go without." He nodded. "I reckon that's the truth." In the days that followed, letters arrived from Dawson Creek. The sheriff sent word. Amos Talbert and his men had been sentenced. Nothing too long, but long enough. Long enough to remind them the world had changed since they'd last walked through it. Grace's name was cleared. The preacher's grip had been broken, but that didn't mean she wanted to go back. "I want to raise this child where no one decides who we are but us," she said. "Where he—" She paused, smiling. "Or she knows love isn't earned by fear." They sat outside the cabin then, wrapped in old quilts, watching the first geese fly north. The air smelled different, like thawed earth, like something waking up. "Elijah," she said quietly, "do you ever miss what you left behind?" He didn't answer right away, just ran his thumb along the edge of his coffee mug. "I used to," he said finally. "Used to think about what might have been, the folks I lost. The homestead burned in the war, my wife, the child we never had." Grace looked at him with something soft in her eyes. "But now?" she asked. "Now I figure maybe I wasn't meant to save the past," he said. "Maybe I was meant to build something new with what I had left." They didn't speak after that. Didn't need to. Somehow between the silence and the snowmelt something had begun to root. Not romance, not yet. But something better. Belonging. The wind shifted that morning, warmer, carrying the scent of wet pine and river silt. Elijah noticed. At first, he stood at the porch rail, boots muddy from checking the fence line, and watched a flock of birds wheel high above the trees, restless. Nature always knows before we do. Inside, Grace was bent over the table, humming quietly as she peeled apples. She'd insisted on baking something sweet for the sheriff's visit that afternoon, said it was the least she could do for a man who rode through snow to protect a woman nobody else would. But halfway through the second apple, she stopped. Both hands on the edge of the table, eyes wide, breath short. "Elijah," she called, voice trembling. He was through the door in 3 steps. "Is it time?" She nodded, already crying. "It's time." What followed was not dramatic, not loud, just hours of quiet pain, of whispered reassurances, of firelight dancing across walls, as day faded into night and returned again. Elijah never left her side. He boiled water, brought clean cloths, kept the stove warm. He didn't panic, didn't pace. He just stayed. And at sunrise, with the sky cracked gold and the first bird song of spring lilting through the window, a child's cry filled the cabin. It was a boy. Grace held him to her chest, weeping, laughing, rocking gently as though the world had gone still just to witness this one soft miracle. Elijah stood nearby, hands clasped, not quite sure where to look. He hadn't known he could love something that wasn't his in name, but somehow felt like it was his in every other way. Grace looked up at him, tired but radiant. "Do you want to hold him?" He froze. "You sure?" She nodded. "You kept me safe. You kept him safe. If there's anyone I trust to hold him, it's you." So he did. The baby fit in his arms like he'd been waiting for that exact place in the world. Eyes closed, fist curled around Elijah's finger. "I never thought I'd get to see this," Elijah whispered. Grace smiled. "Neither did I." They named him River, for the one that ran behind the cabin, for the water that broke the winter, for the way life sometimes cuts through rock and finds a way to keep moving. Later that week, the townsfolk from Dawson Creek came out one by one. The sheriff brought supplies. The shopkeep brought extra blankets. Even the town doctor rode in to check on Grace, tipping his hat and calling the baby sturdy as a mule and twice as handsome. Word had spread, not of the scandal, not of the church, but of the kindness, of the man who opened his door to a stranger and ended up with a family. No one questioned it. In the months that followed, the garden grew. So did River. He had Elijah's quiet eyes and Grace's stubborn mouth and a laugh that could melt frost off window glass. They never did speak much about the past. But some evenings, when the fire was low and River lay sleeping in the cradle Elijah had built, Grace would rest her head on Elijah's shoulder and whisper, "Thank you for finding me." And every time he'd say the same thing. "I think you were the one who found me." And maybe that's what the West was always meant to be. Not just a place to run, but a place to arrive. To start again. To belong. If this story meant something to you, we hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. But before you go, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story hit home for you, make sure you're subscribed, because I've saved something even more special for you tomorrow.